This nibble originally aired on RSBANDB Update, episode 882, Behind the Crown, Mod Shrike. Enjoy. I want to pivot into a bit about what content developers do, because a lot of people assume that making games is easy, as in you push a button, or maybe you just write some code quick here and there. You might have a quick turnaround time to see what we get in game and what's ultimately produced. And I want to talk a bit about what being a game developer is like. And I have some specific questions on this, but is there anything that jumps out of your mind initially that you want to get off your chest on this? Or
I think the main distinction to make is that content developers at Jagex have a little bit of a strange role compared to kind of game developers or game designers in the rest of the industry. We're not strictly game designers and we're not strictly programmers. We're kind of in the middle. I can go into that a bit more detail if you like.
Yeah,
and I think it's kind of a layover from the time when it was a very small indie studio and, you know, one person did everything. They did the design, they did the coding, they did the scripting, everything. And that attitude and that philosophy of kind of one person owning many stages of development still holds.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool.
So does that mean then that somebody who is a content developer at Jagex needs to have a strong grasp on the area in which they're working, as in you as primarily a quest writer, quest player previously, you have to have a strong aspect on the lore? And would the same be true for somebody who creates or works on the Elder God Wars bosses, for example?
We are generalists. You know, a content developer is a generalist game designer, but we do have specialisms just kind of in the kind of content we make. Like in theory, I could be put on anything. Like I could do a skilling update, right. I could do a bossing update, I could do a questing update. I just happen to have done quests and pretty much exclusively quests since I joined. So I'm very familiar with how the questing system works and how dialogue systems work and how, you know, the narrative design processes of RuneScape 3 work. But that doesn't mean I'm kind of pigeonholed into making quests.
Okay.
Like I could go onto a combat update and I would have to spend a bit of time learning how combat worked and, you know, talking to the devs who have done more combat updates than me. But we're not kind of siloed like that.
That's
like
interesting, because
a developer could put anything in game in theory.
Because a lot of the people who see certain devs on live stream and whatnot will automatically assume, because they always come in and talk about that's going to be their role forever. But with this, you're saying that things like that could change then. That's an interesting way, I think, of looking at it, because it probably allows for a bit of personal exploration too, if you wanted to or needed to be assigned to such a thing. Yeah,
there's a lot of that as well. Kind of trying out things and exploring areas of the game you're not familiar with, because RuneScape's a huge game. Like in terms of the variety of content and the variety of different things players can do, it's vast. Because it's an MMO and it's an old one. So there's always a new area to learn about. There's always a new style of gameplay to learn how to put together. Like I don't think anyone has mastery over the entire game in terms of content devs. It's a collective effort to
the team, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
And this kind of goes into the first thing I wanted to ask in this, and that people might think that producing an update is a quick and easy process. And this is where we can go further into that idea of what does being a content developer mean. You said it goes across the multiple disciplines. So what would it look like if you were typically a developer in a different game studio versus a gameplay programmer, and where does it meet in the middle for you?
So that's a bit of a difficult question to answer, because I think every studio does it differently.
Okay.
This is the thing with game development, because it's a relatively young field, you know, artistically, compared to other things like film, for instance. Like the roles aren't solidified when you think really they should be.
Okay.
But generally in the larger studios, you'll have the designers who will do prototypes, documentation, very early playtests, and just kind of thinking up the stuff.
In effect, and then you'll have, like, say, design a core loop and make sure the gameplay is fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you'll have the programmers who actually put it into the code and make the software. Compare that to content developers who will do the design and the scripting.
Okay. So
we design something and then we script it as well and send it off to QA.
Interesting. So it's pretty much, would you say then, almost directly down the middle on that path, and it would be in that case a good way to perhaps for the developer to also learn about the design aspect as well.
Yeah. So I think in general, like content devs need to be designers with decent coding chops or decent scripting chops at least. Like I wouldn't say you need to know a proper inverted commas coding language, because RuneScape isn't like a proper coding language, inverted commas.
Right.
But you do need to know how to script in some kind of language so you can pick up RuneScript.
Okay.
And some game designers can't code. Some game designers don't need to learn to code in their jobs, which is absolutely fine.
Right.
It's just depending on the job role. Some studios don't need their designers to be able to code or script. But yeah, content devs do.
Yeah, and this was actually mentioned in the 20th anniversary book, that the whole reason RuneScript initially existed was that it was created by Andrew so that people without the quote-unquote proper programming language skills could create content for the game. And
yeah,
you guys are still using that all these years, and obviously from this it's working, and you guys do a wonderful job at weaving it all together, let's just say.
Yeah.
So with that, I think comes a misconception, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, amongst the player base, is that an individual content developer makes all the decisions. So with that, is it fair to say that the decisions come down to the team aspect more so than just the individual content dev aspect? Or maybe a better way of putting this is, how often does a content developer get to make a decision regarding a piece of content?
This assumption is something I've noticed, and it is a little bit annoying because it's quite hard to correct. Well,
let's correct it right now.
But because we do, have a lot of player interaction, we do have devs, including myself. I enjoy doing this. I put my name out saying, hey, I've made this. What do you think? And I think that can give the wrong impression sometimes, so like how much control a content dev has over a piece of content. In general, we do have a lot of authorship, to be fair. And it kind of depends on project to project. So, for example, let's talk about Fortunes, actually. Well, that was a solo project for me.
All right.
I was given certain aims and certain constraints from people like Mod Rowley, who were kind of the higher ups looking after, overall direction. There are people who look after overall direction of content updates over the year and kind of have a much broader view of how things are going. And that can be business aims, product aims, design aims, all kind of stuff like that. So I had a basic set of aims to work with. How I achieved those aims was up to me. So I got to make a lot of individual decisions on that. On a larger project, for example, the Elder Gold Wars finale, which had a much bigger dev team. I mean, I was feature lead for that. So in theory,
what exactly does that term mean for that?
So feature lead is basically, it's quite a difficult one to answer, really. I was responsible for the overall direction of it, but that doesn't mean I made all the decisions myself. That was definitely a team effort.
Right.
Very much relying and, leaning on people with more experience than me to help me make the right decisions. I think the only real bit of authority I had on that was that if there were two options to go with and both of them were equally good, I say I want to do A instead of B, we go with A.
Okay. So
kind of doing the deal breaker stuff.
Right. So in effect, it comes down to the team aspect largely, but there are pieces of content where if you're solo, like Fortunes, or if you're feature lead, like the finale Elder God Wars quest, you would make that final call if the decision came down to it and there was no easy path forward.
Yeah, and to be clear, like making that final call isn't entirely on me either. Like there are a whole load of people, like technical limitations and artistic limitations and QA limitations and localization limitations and all sorts of like other departments who are also involved in making that decision.
So in effect, you got to consider the entire field then.
You've got to consider the entire scope of the update. Like I could go into Fortunes and say, I want 3 custom cutscenes and a 10,000 word budget, and because my producer would just slap me around the face and say, no, we're not doing that.
It's a mini quest. Was a mini quest.
Fortunes was a mini quest. It was quite small.
Yeah.
I think it was a couple of thousand words. But this is where like people like producers come in, because they know everyone and know what everyone's doing, and so they can help you make those decisions to make sure the update gets out the door in time, which is the most important thing.
Right. And that's something that has been discussed a lot in the community. That dreaded C word that we heard thrown around a lot. I won't mention it here in case that word still is bothering to people in the community, but nonetheless. So just recapping on that, then you'd say that overall you have a fairly good amount of, I guess we could say, artistic license on making decisions at points along the road then?
Yeah. And, that informed decisions, I think, is the best way to put it. Like, you talk to the councils, you talk to the specialists, you talk to people who really know what they're doing, because you might have been given a piece of content that you're not familiar with. So you have to talk to the people who are familiar with it to help you make the right decision. And if you make the wrong decision, other devs will tell you and help you reconsider. Like that it isn't like once you've made the decision, it's final.
Right.
Like, there's a whole load of feedback processes with that as well.
And you mentioned, sorry, continue.
Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
You mentioned the councils in particular with that. I know on your bio you said lore council as well, and I'd imagine that all just weaves together, especially with all the quests that you've been working on. That it felt probably like a natural fit, and given the knowledge of the game lore that you had beforehand with this, and I think a question a lot of players have with this is I guess in the case of the lore council, since that's one you're involved in, do they meet regularly, or is it more of an ad hoc thing when, like you said, a developer has a question about something or they need to plot something going forward?
Mix of both.
Okay.
So we do have, regular, I mean, we're all working from home at the moment, so we all have Slack channels and everything that if you need to talk to a council, you can do that. But the lore council does meet every week. Or if there's nothing to talk about, we might skip a week, but we do try to get together on a weekly basis just to talk about the outstanding questions and future story and like resolving issues with past story, that kind of stuff. I know the combat and skilling councils do similar.
All right, sounds good. You can find full episodes of RSBANDB Update right here on this YouTube channel. If you found this video useful or just enjoyed it, like and subscribe, or leave a comment.